The spousal benefit calculation is one of the most misunderstood parts of the Social Security system, but it doesn't have to be. There's a really simple formula and a couple of rules that make this really easy to understand. And today, I'll show you exactly how spousal benefits work and how you can calculate those for your specific situation so you can either plan with accurate numbers or spot mistakes in your payment amount. Oh, and I'll also share a free tool that takes a lot of the guesswork out of this process. So, I've covered this topic before, but I know a lot of people are still really confused about it. Not just those who are preparing for retirement, but unfortunately, even some of the professionals helping them. So, I think it's worth visiting again. And when I revisit a topic that I've talked about before, it's because I feel like I can make it a little clearer than I did the last time we talked about it. And I think this is going to be the best video that I've made so far on spousal benefits. But before we dive in, a quick note. Most of my videos get hundreds of comments, and a lot of them are from people who need help and answers to their questions. And I do try to reply to as many of them as I can, but honestly, I already spend too much time in the evenings in the comment section when I should probably be spending time with my family. So to help me keep up, I've turned on YouTube memberships. And for just $5 a month, you can join the supporter tier. You can get priority replies to your comments with that, a badge beside your name so I can spot you right away. And really just a simple way to show appreciation for the content that we're building together here. And if there's enough interest, I'll add another tier later with membership-only live streams and early access to videos. There's a join button right below this video. And if you don't see it there, there's also going to be a link down in the description. So, let's get back to making sense out of spousal benefits. So, the simplest way to think about spousal benefits is to see them as a guarantee. If the lower earning spouse files for Social Security at full retirement age, they won't receive less than half of the higher earners' full retirement age benefit. So, let's start with a really simple example, and then we'll build in the parts that tend to create some of the confusion here. So, imagine a couple where one spouse worked outside the home and paid into Social Security. At full retirement age, that spouse is eligible for a $3,000 monthly benefit. Now, the other spouse didn't work enough to qualify for their own benefit, but they're still eligible for a spousal benefit. And at full retirement age, that spousal benefit is $1,500, which is exactly one half of the higher earner's benefit. Now, there are a couple of important things to understand about these spousal benefits before we move on too much further. First, the reduction for filing early on a spousal benefit is sharper than the reduction for a benefit that you earn from your own work. And second, a spousal benefit does not increase after full retirement age, while your own benefit does continue to grow if you delay claiming. And let's look at these side by side so you can see the difference, because this becomes really important later on when we start to calculate the spousal benefit. And just a quick note here for my fellow spreadsheet nerds. At the end of this video, I'll put a chart up that shows the exact percentage reductions for each benefit type, not just by the year, but all the way down to how much that should be reduced or increased per month. But for now, I just want to keep it simple and use a $1,500 benefit as our example. So in the middle column here, you're going to see how a benefit from your own work changes when you file early or when you delay. And in the column on the far right, you're looking at how a spousal benefit changes over those same periods, and you'll immediately notice that the early filing reduction is steeper for the spousal benefit. At age 62, that $1,500 spousal benefit drops to about $975, while the benefit from your own work would only be reduced to $150. So there's a $75 per month difference at 62. Then on the other side of full retirement age, you'll notice something else. The spousal benefit doesn't grow if you delay, but your own benefit keeps increasing all the way to age 70. And those reductions and increases matter because they set up the part of spousal benefits that cause the most confusion, something called dual entitlement. Now, dual entitlement means that you have a scenario where the lower earning spouse worked enough to earn their own benefit. But that benefit is still less than half of the higher earner's benefit. And so in that case, they're actually entitled to two things, their own benefit and an additional spousal benefit. Now that's the dual part of the dual entitlement. So here's an example that builds on what we used before, where we're saying that the higher earner's full retirement age is $3,000. And in this case, we'll assume that the other spouse did some work and qualified for their own benefit of $1,200 at full retirement age. Now, remember that guarantee we talked about. The lower earner won't receive less than half of the higher earner's benefit at full retirement age. So half of 3,000 is 1,500. And so in this situation, the lower earner is eligible for a total benefit of $1,500. And again, here's where that dual part comes in. The lower earner would actually receive their own benefit, that $1,200. And then they'd receive a spousal payment of $300 to bring their total up to $1,500. That's why it's called dual entitlement. There's two separate benefits being combined into one monthly payment, and that's important to understand because the increases and reductions are calculated separately as we covered a moment ago, even though they all show up together in a same single check. Now, the good news is you don't have to memorize all of that. There's a very simple formula you can use to see these two pieces very clearly. Here it is. You just take 1/2 of the higher earner's full retirement age benefit minus the lower earner's full retirement age benefit, and the number that remains is the spousal benefit. So if we go back to our example, the higher earner has a full retirement age benefit of 3,000 and the lower earner has a full retirement age benefit of 1,200. So half the higher earner's benefit is $1,500, and when we subtract the lower earner's $1,200 benefit, we can see that the spousal payment is $300. Now you may be thinking, Devin, look, if the total still ends up being half of the higher earner's benefit, why does this formula and all this chatter even matter? Well, it matters because those two pieces of total benefit, the piece based on your own work and the spousal excess amount, are not treated the same. I think this is probably the third time I've said that, so I hate to be redundant, but this is really the crux of figuring all of this out because this gets really important in situations when someone files for their own benefit at one age but doesn't become entitled to the spousal payment until later. Now, that usually happens because of a rule that says a spousal benefit cannot be paid until the higher earner files for their benefit. So the timing of each piece can be different, which means the reductions and increases applied to each piece can also be different. So let me show you an example here. And to make this easier to grasp, I'm going to break it down between the reductions for filing early, and then we'll talk about the increases for filing later. And that's where I want to show you something that almost no one is talking about. And just like we have throughout this video, I want to make the assumption that we're talking about someone that has a full retirement age of 67, which is the full retirement age for anyone who was born in 1960 or later. If you're trying to calculate that, by the way, for someone who has a different full retirement age, you can just use the chart at the end of this video or my spousal benefit calculator, which I'm going to link up below. So, we'll continue to use the example of someone who has a $1,200 benefit from their own work and a $300 spousal payment. At full retirement age, they'd receive both of those for a total payment of $1,500 as long as the higher earning spouse had already filed for their benefits. And you can see how this is reduced down the line until age 62, where they're getting two pieces of that for one total benefit. And then on the other side, you'll notice that the spousal benefit actually gets smaller every year. And that's because the rules say that any increases to the worker's own benefit from delayed filing will be deducted from the spousal payment. So this means that if the lower earning spouse's benefit is less than $1 half of the higher earner's benefit, it typically doesn't make any sense for the lower earning spouse to delay beyond full retirement age because the increased benefit is simply subtracted from the spousal excess, meaning that the lower earning spouse is not going to be receiving a higher benefit for waiting. Now, everything that we've talked about so far is fairly straightforward and neat. Those have all been cases where the lower earning spouse started receiving their own benefit and a spousal benefit at the same time. But that's not how it happens in a lot of real-life cases. What I often see is that the lower earning spouse files for their own benefit while the higher earning spouse is still working or simply hasn't filed for some other reason. So here's the rule that matters in these situations. It's the age at which you become entitled to each piece of the benefit that determines how that piece is calculated. So let's walk through an example. Let's assume that the lower earning spouse files for their own benefit at 62, but the higher earning spouse doesn't file until that lower earner turns 67. So from age 62 to 67, the lower earning spouse would receive the reduced amount based on their early filing and their own benefit only, which in this example is $780 per month. Then, once the higher earner finally files at 67, the lower earner becomes entitled to the spousal portion. And because that entitlement to the spousal portion happens at the lower earner's full retirement age, the spousal payment is calculated as if they filed for it at 67, even though they filed for their own benefits earlier. So at 67, their total benefit jumps to $1,080 made up of their own reduced benefit plus the unreduced spousal payment. Now, of course, all of these dollar amounts would be adjusted for inflation in real life. But just to keep things simple, I wanted to leave inflation out of this. So, as you can see, though, a spousal benefit does go a little deeper than simply assuming. It's always one half of the higher earner's benefit. There's a little math involved, and the timing really matters between these two pieces of the benefit. But if you'd rather not run these calculations for yourself, guess what? There's an easy tool that you can use that's free on my website. It's a spousal benefit calculator. And to my knowledge, it's the only one like it. And I had it built specifically to unravel the confusion around spousal benefits. And it is designed just to make the whole process simple. You just plug in your numbers and it walks you through everything step by step. Again, there's going to be a link to that calculator down in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and here's that chart I promised.